I'd go trekking through the paddy fields to get to spots where I just had this unobstructed view of the mountain.
That was Mr. Soul, talking about his early days of meditation in India. We'll come back to him for more in just a moment. Good afternoon, and welcome to a special edition of Secrets of the Path, here on the Gita News Network. I'm Vishnu Das. Thank you for joining us. Today's top story: who is in control of your mind? Certainly there is no better place to introduce the topic of meditation than here at the foot of the holy mountain Arunachala, said to be the embodiment of Lord Shiva. Times change, people change, everything changes, but the mountain remains the same. When I look at the peak of Arunachala, it seems like the perfect symbol or metaphor of that eternal reality, our own true self, that inner flame that remains perfectly still. On today's episode, with help from some special guests, we'll take a look at the yoga of meditation in the light of Chapter 6 of the Bhagavad Gita and the guidance of Swami Sri Atmananda. Before we return to Mr. Soul, let's take 30 seconds to consider 3 quick points regarding how Gita expresses the concept of meditation. Although Chapter 6 is entitled The Yoga of Meditation, the word meditate does not appear in this chapter. Rather, these 47 verses contain nearly 60 action verbs like perform, conquer, practice, and abandon. That's our first clue that there's a lot more to meditation than just sitting and closing your eyes. On the other hand, the word yoga appears 20 times in this chapter, and the title of the chapter itself is the Yoga of Meditation, not simply meditation. Yoga means addition, link, and union. For example, become linked through meditation. Become united by meditating. Linked with what? United with what? Stay tuned. To help visualize what Lord Krishna is talking about here, our interns created a word cloud of the whole chapter. The way a word cloud works is that the more frequently a word is used, the larger it appears. This is just another way to help immerse ourselves in Gita. From this perspective, we can see that words like one, yogi, yoga, self, and mind seem pretty important in Chapter 6. One way to connect these dots might be something like, the yogi becomes one with the self through yoga by controlling the mind. We now go back to Mr. Soul and his early days in India.
As a young man, I was quite the rock and roller, enjoying complete material saturation, having lots of fun, but somehow I wasn't fulfilled. There was this void in my life. And so I got inspired to come to India by some things I'd read and heard. I landed at the airport, and on the bus to Tiruvannamalai, I started getting glimpses of Arunachala through the window. And it just seemed so present, so tranquil. And when we pulled into town and I actually got my first sight of the mountain, it was so inspiring. First thing the local people did was send me to a department store to get some Indian clothes. And from that point, they were so friendly and supportive. They gave me ideas of where I could sit and meditate near the mountain. They offered me places in their fields.
Mother India welcomed you to her lap. Let's be clear for everyone in the audience that although you were very drawn to Arunachala and to India's spiritual environment overall, there's certainly no requirement that one come here in order to meditate. Personally, I've had my most profound meditations at home in California. As the mother of Pondicherry wrote, exterior things must be of little importance when one does sadhana. The needed inner peace can be established in any surroundings. Let's now turn to our senior correspondent, Yogi, to share with us some of the effects one may begin to feel through meditation.
Personally, when I began to meditate, one of the first effects that I noticed was that everything inside of me seemed to slow down. It was like my consciousness became much more calm and contemplative. The rest of the world kept moving at its normal pace. All of the hustle and bustle was still there. And I was in it, but like I wasn't part of it. Suddenly it was different from me. I was at my own rhythm. Mr. Soul told me that for him, this effect was even more pronounced. He said, "You know verse 116 of Gita that talks about day and night? Well, for me, when I got some stability in meditation, suddenly it seemed like everyone else was moving backwards."
Right. The more one begins to come into contact with the inner dimension, the less one feels the pull for the outer experiences that motivate most people. As we mentioned earlier, meditation doesn't mean just sitting down and closing your eyes. The meditation process begins with and is sustained by action in the waking state of consciousness. Then ultimately, meditation becomes one's natural state. Yogi, is there a certain verse in chapter 6 that you use to help keep your mind focused?
That varies from day to day and even moment to moment, but right now, I would say 263. This verse comes to me right now for two primary perspectives. First is the power of satsang. I've been participating in a lot of satsangs lately. Satsang literally means in the company of truth.
So, as that verse says, if you're able to see Lord Krishna in everyone, you'll always be in his company, and his guidance may come to you through everyone. Tell us more about satsang and how this relates.
In yoga, it's a practice whereby a group of like-minded seekers, generally a small group, comes together to share our experiences on the yoga path. It could be dissecting a verse of Gita or looking at how the concepts apply or how we interpret them.
Any recent examples about how satsang and this verse helped you resolve a challenge on the yoga path?
Yes. Just a few mornings ago, I got identified with a very little thing someone did, and I spoke roughly to this person in the ashram dining hall. And I was stewing over that a bit.
How so?
Oh, why did I have to do that? Why couldn't I practice austerity of speech and so on? A few hours later, I found myself sitting across a desk from Satyachetana life member Ajaya.
What did you say to him?
You sometimes speak roughly to people. How do you get over that? How do you regain your balance afterward? And it immediately turned into a very rewarding and beneficial mini satsang.
Simply one word, your question and our discussion finished. 80% of my delusion, it is very useful. Sometimes it will be useful.
Satsang.
But be a like-minded person. Not otherwise satsang will be giving opposite direction.
Thank you for sharing that. It seems like you and Ajaya were able to see in each other the light of Krishna, and that illumination helped you regain your balance on the path. You said verse 263 came to you for two reasons. First was satsang, and you mentioned to me earlier that the second reason is an old song lyric. What is that lyric?
Once in a while, you can get shown the light in the strangest of places if you look at it right.
That almost sounds like it was inspired by the Bhagavad Gita. In fact, Swami Sri Atmananda has given examples of seeing the light through something spoken by his 4-year-old son, and even in the behavior of a dog. Yogi, what does that lyric say to you about verse 263?
We know God is everywhere, God is everything, God is in everything. And so if we can just remain open to the possibility and the reality that light and universal love and signals are coming to us through everything, in every circumstance, in every object, in every being, that will be fulfilling verse 263 and will be moving toward that unity consciousness.
And yet, chapter 6 of Gita, the Yoga of Meditation, starts off by talking about detachment and sense control.
It always goes back to sense control. As human beings living in the material world, we are just bombarded with sensory input, sounds and tastes and smells and so on.
Is that sensory input a problem for yogis?
That in itself is not bad. We live in the material world and we need to perceive it. But as yogis, our objective is to just turn down the frequency a bit, right? Modulate those signals coming to us from outer nature so that we can be more perceptive and linked with the inner nature, the higher nature, that which is beyond the senses. It's like what Mike Millett and Mr. Soul articulated a few episodes ago about balancing experience and awareness.
Speaking of Mr. Soul, we now bring the question to him. Mr. Soul, what's the key to meditation?
You want to control the mind? You've got to control the senses.
Why is that?
Your thoughts are connected to sensory experience. Look at what you're thinking about. It's all connected to something you touched, tasted, felt, saw, or heard.
Why is sense control so important here?
If you don't control the senses and they keep running after experience, when you sit for meditation, that's all you'll be thinking about.
By this stage of the journey, hasn't sense control already been covered?
In the first 5 chapters, Gita teaches the seeker everything about sense control, but that doesn't mean it ends. Sense control is highlighted right through the end of chapter 18. Here we are in chapter 6. The yoga of meditation, what's being emphasized? Sense control. Look at verse 237. Free from the urges of action for sense gratification. Verse 243, control the senses. 245, control the senses. 254, not from sense contact. This is a fundamental bedrock necessity, and a lot of people mistakenly think that just because they're not running to a restaurant means they have sense control. Wrong.
Are you saying that people are fooling themselves? Or more precisely, that our minds are capable of fooling us?
Mind is the king of the senses, but mind is tricky. Mind can justify and rationalize anything. So the yogi really needs to be careful.
Right. The seeker needs to be careful about not letting the mind justify the pursuit of pleasure. You've also mentioned that seekers can sometimes become misled about the goal of meditation. Could you elaborate on that?
Of the infinite blessings and guidance that I have received from Swami Sri Atmananda, here is one small example. Sitting and closing the eyes, that's not meditation, that's preparation for meditation.
Why is that?
Because the goal is not just to be linked with that inner self during the 45 minutes when you're meditating, it's to be linked with it 24 hours a day.
How so?
Let's take it back to chapter 3, the penultimate verse. It says, senses are powerful, mind is stronger than them, intellect is stronger than that, but you need to be linked with something that's higher than the intellect, beyond that. What is that? That's the self, that's the soul, that's what meditation does. It gets you that inner link. Always be connected with that.
What does that look like in day-to-day life?
This chapter speaks of a state when the yogi experiences endless bliss and is ever satisfied with knowledge and wisdom. How can such a state be reached if one is constantly running after sense pleasures? It can't.
So if meditation is not the ultimate goal, why is it such an important part of the path?
Again, we come back to the concept of balancing experience and awareness. And that's actually a funny way to say it. We come back because we never left it. That's the whole focus of Gita, balancing awareness and experience. So at this point, through the first 5 chapters, the yogi has made great strides in modulating, tempering, controlling the experience. And now chapter 6 is giving the technique to strengthen and enhance, build up the awareness. And so really bring that balance as close to even as we can.
Of course, all experience is temporary, whereas you and Gita are speaking of being linked with something that is permanent. Could you elaborate on that?
One thing is permanent. One thing is absolute. One thing never goes away. That is the truth. Na sato vidite bhavo, na bhava vidite satha. Verse 63.
Mr. Soul, please take us back to your early days of meditating at the foot of Arunachala, and give us a glimpse of your inner state back then.
The silence of that early morning before sunrise, and then when the sun starts coming up, it's just this mystical, magical time. When I'm deep into the silence of meditation, it's like I go outside my body, higher and higher. Everything else just recedes. It's like I'm the only one on the planet. Then that disappears and there's just nothing.
Thank you for sharing that, Mr. Soul. Coming back to our discussion, I know from experience that controlling the mind is not easy. Yet all of this seems simple.
It's very simple. It's completely simple. But the challenge is that in this human body, we've got a mind, we've got an intellect, and the mind and intellect get involved. They make things very complex, convoluted, contorted, confusing. It's a conspiracy.
That reminds me of Arjuna's questions to Krishna near the end of this chapter. Although they were sitting on a chariot on an ancient battlefield, their timeless dialogue so directly addresses human nature, one can imagine the conversation playing out today. As always, Mr. Soul, thank you so much for joining us. Any parting inspiration today for the yogis?
There's a verse in the next chapter, sneak preview, that says, right from birth, all beings are deluded due to attraction, repulsion, confusion, and attachment. Those all come from senses and mind. If you can solve that, you'll proceed at turbo speed.
Let's now pause for viewer mail. Zoe Hispadula of Grenoble, France, wrote in to ask,
What is the difference when self is written with a capital S or with a lowercase s? Or is that just a typo?
You're right, Zoe. There is a difference. For clarification, we now go live to Stockholm, home to one of the world's leading centers for the study of the self, the Swedish Institute of Selfishness. Our next guest is the Institute's Director of Research, Dr. Ananya Superstar, renowned for her groundbreaking study of Gita verse 252. She is popularly known in academic circles as the Lamp Lady. Please stand by. We're having difficulty connecting the video call. Can she hear us?
Achyutam Keshavam Krishna Damodaram Achyutam Keshavam.
Excuse me, Dr. Superstar?
Yes.
Dr. Superstar, that's a curious name for an institution dedicated to meditation research. Most people probably consider selfishness as an unattractive trait or something to be avoided. Does your research disagree with that commonly held notion?
Just the opposite, Vishnudas. In fact, my team and I could not agree more. We view selfishness as an obstacle on the yoga path and for humans overall. In short, our research demonstrates that selfishness is something to be avoided, whereas selfishness is something to strive for.
Could you clarify that, Dr. Superstar?
It's quite basic, Vishudas. Maybe you need a refresher. Let's have a look at verse 239.
So the key is in the capitalization. As Swami Sri Atmananda explains, the uppercase self is the soul, whereas the lowercase self is our mind. Keep that in mind. Of course, this whole topic is beyond the mind, which is why we need to strive diligently to control the mind and go beyond its limits. Dr. Superstar, your conclusion?
Don't be a slave to the self. Connect yourself to yourself and become selfish, not selfish.
Thank you, Dr. Superstar. We now go live to special correspondent Aditi Biswal, who is standing by in Tiruvannamalai. Aditi?
From the outside, Aditi Forest Kitchen looked like just another roadside cafe on the Girivalam here in Tiruvannamalai, India.
Full disclosure, it's no coincidence that Aditi Forest Kitchen has the same name as our correspondent Aditi, because the cafe is run by her loving parents, Purnasmitama and Ajaya. Back to you, Aditi.
Unknown to most passerbys, this humble snack shop is actually the world headquarters of the International Samosa Society. Joining me today is the Society's chairman, Malcolm Tiff. You may recognize him from his appearance on episode 3, Secrets of the Path. Malcolm, welcome.
Thank you, Aditi. Very glad to be here.
Malcolm, let's jump right in. Tell us the principal purpose and objectives of the International Samosa Society. What is it all about?
The Society's slogan is take a bite and see the light. By showing people, through example, how to enjoy a samosa without being overtaken by indulgence is our first step toward exposing them to the teachings of Gita.
And for that purpose, what snack could be better than a fresh hot samosa? Appealing appearance, appetizing aroma, a wholesome heft on the hand, a crispy and crunchy taste, and a delicious flavor. It's all 5 senses wrapped in a deep-fried pastry shell.
Precisely. That's what inspired the Society's founders to use samosas as an opportunity to evaluate their yogic practice in regard to Gita verses like 249 and 250.
Malcolm, let's now turn to one of your fellow founding director, whom you have called the force behind the International Samosa Society, His Holiness Swami Samosanandaji. Swamiji Pranam, please elaborate on how samosas help to spread the light of Gita.
Thank you. My Gurudev Swami Sri Atmananda Ji Maharaj has said that scriptures need to be reinterpreted as per the need of the time. For that reason, please consider this contemporary perception of verse 249. One who eats too many samosas or too few or sleep too much or does not sleep at all cannot attain success in yoga. You see, Lord Krishna is not saying to avoid samosas. He is saying to eat them in moderation.
Thank you, Swamiji. Now it's all starting to make sense. For Gita News Network, I am Aditi Biswal reporting live from Tiruvannamalai, India. Back to you, Vishnudas.
Thank you, Aditi, and thank you for joining us today. If you'd like to learn a powerful meditation technique that was revealed by Swami Sri Atmananda, use the link below in the comments section. And join us next time for another episode of Secrets of the Path, here on the Gita News Network. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
This script man is...
And he articulated it so beautifully, I'd just like to share a few minutes of that here, if I may. Flies.
We view selfishness as an obstacle on the yoga. Your hand is on.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, super.